Today is Monday, March 10th, 2025. My name is Alexa Leon. I'm interviewing Nora de Hoyos Comstock in Austin, Texas for the Voces Oral History Center. Thank you, Dr. Comstock, for agreeing to this interview.
I'm thrilled.
So, just a couple of notes. The raw, unedited recording of this interview will be archived at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collections on UT campus, where it'll be available to anyone who wishes to access it. If there's anything you don't wish to talk about, we respect your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to discuss, please do make sure that we discuss it. Please also let us know if you need a pause for the interview. So today we're going to be talking about your life experiences, starting from your childhood up to our present day. As part of this, we'll discuss your family, education, career, and of course, Las Comadres para las Americas. And if you're ready, Dr. Comstock, we can begin.
Let's roll.
Awesome. So tell me about growing up in the Rio Grande Valley and what are some of the lasting impacts it's had on you?
That was laid the foundation for a lot of the work that I do, and the experiences that I had really have lasted throughout my life. And I remember some of it. I seem to forget a lot these days, but I think it's just the amount of information that's in your brain, right? You forget after a while. But what I remember is being old enough, I guess, to speak and to talk to my neighbor. I always remember that because this lady who was, she was non-Latina. She was actually German. And she and her family lived next door. And she was the first person to tell me that I was not the biological daughter of Juan and Sofia de Hoyos. They didn't get to tell me. Our neighbor was the one who would say to me on a regular basis, "You're adopted." And I had no clue what being adopted meant. I mean, it was not a term used, and no one ever said it to me except her. And she was so proud to say, "You're adopted." And so I would walk around saying, I'm adopted. And it didn't mean anything to me, right? I just was adopted. And so nobody ever felt the need to explain that to me, to tell me what it meant, how it happened. None of that ever happened. We never talked about it because I think everybody assumed I understood what it meant to be adopted, and I didn't because I was way too young to understand what that was all about. So I knew I was adopted, and it had great impact, because it's a long story about how I have come to deal with that, and I didn't know I needed to deal with it, but you do, or at least I did, and from what I've read, adopted children need to deal with those things, at least have some basic understanding. So that was a memory that is deeply etched in my persona. Mm-hmm. I also recall being bilingual from early on, right? So I spoke Spanish and English pretty much simultaneously. And those were, it was just part of life. Everybody in my immediate, it seemed to me that most of the people in my immediate relationships spoke English and Spanish because we lived largely in a Latino neighborhood. I don't recall ever meeting any Black people because mostly it was, and I know there were some, but I never met them. So I laid the foundation for that part of my experience. I also recall that I knew I had brothers and sisters. Again, I didn't know what it meant. All I knew, they lived someplace else. And I knew that my biological parents were Enriqueta and Oscar de la Garza, and that my name was de Hoyos. We all knew that. And so we would go over there. My mothers were sisters biologically, and my fathers were first cousins. So there was, that relationship there. And we all always met at my grandmother's house, and we would go over to visit. One in Oscar and Enriqueta, we would go over to their house, and then I would leave, and my brothers and sisters stayed there. I believe I was the third child of, and to get that, en Oscar de la Garza. I had an older brother and then two older brothers. And I was the first girl. Can you imagine in a Latino family being the first girl? That was my first gold award, because if I had stayed in that family, I got to do everything for my brothers. And I'm not real good about doing that kind of thing, so I think I would have been mad all the time, which I think a lot of us Latinas who ended up having to do that for our brothers were not necessarily happy about it. But I got out of it. And so my oldest brother would always comment, "You were damn lucky to get out of this," because I had to play that role. And so he said I owed him. And that was, I was so fortunate, because I don't cook well, and I don't iron. And I don't think I ever ironed, and I don't think if I did, I didn't do it well. But anyway, today, thank God, we don't have to do that sort of stuff. But I remember those things, which were things I will always remember. How lucky I was to have gotten out of being the oldest girl in a family of 10.
I want to circle back to that anecdote you told me of the neighbor, your neighbor being the first one to tell you that you're adopted. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self, how would you explain to your younger self that you were adopted?
I guess I would just start at the beginning. Actually, it is a very interesting story, because that's how I had to deal with it. I found out Amparo Garcia Crow is an Austin teacher, performer, singer, playwright, who first had kind of a NPR Moth Hour that I was involved in. I both participated in presentations, and then I also set up others that she and I worked on together. But that's basically people standing up and telling their story. And I could always tell people that I was adopted, and it didn't cause any emotional reaction for me. But when I started at my late age of around 50, I kind of was aware that there was something I needed to deal with, but I didn't really understand what it was, because I would stand up to tell the story, and I was very emotional about the adoption. It had never been emotional before. Never in my entire life had it been emotional. But when I started to speak about it in front of an audience and kind of tell the experience, it surfaced things that I had never dealt with. And it was like, well, why was I? Actually, when my biological mother died, my brothers and sisters, we were all there, as well as my aunt, who was my mother. And they asked, why did you give her away? And she told the story, and it's a little complicated, because I'm not sure which parts of it are actually true and which ones are not. And the only reason I say that is because my mother said Juan and Sophia could not have children. Mm. And we knew they couldn't, and we loved them so much. They loved them. That's really all I can say. And Juan would always say, I wish we had kids, I wish we had kids. And my oldest brother, Oscar, always said that all my dad needed to do was look at my mother, and she got pregnant. So they knew, children were in the cards for them. And so they said, apparently my dad, they were fishing, which they used to do together frequently. And my biological father said to Juan, excuse me, we'll give you the next one. Whatever it is, no questions asked, we'll give it to you. There's two parts to the story. Either my dad went home and told my mother, we're giving the next one to them, or he asked her. I'm not sure which of those is really true. So there was a question in my mind about that, but it hardly matters, because in the end, it happened. And I was born and went directly home with Juan and Sophia. As a matter of fact, my first birth certificate had Nora de Hoyos. or Veronica Nora de Hoyos, not de la Garza. Later that got fixed because it was inaccurate. It was de la Garza. Okay. And so when I was 18 years old, I was legally adopted by Juan and Sofia de Hoyos, not because either party really needed it, but because legally it would have been a requirement for me to inherit. And so they took care of all the legal documents when I was 18, or right before I turned 18 years old. And so the story, I lost a little bit of my train of thought of what I was trying to tell you. So my mother, biological mother, when she was dying, because we knew she had cancer, she was going to die within the next 2 weeks or whatever. And so my brothers and sisters asked why. And she said, she told the story, because Juan and Sofia could not have children. And so we gifted her. I am a gift in so many ways. My husband gifted me, Jack Bell, has gifted me to Austin and whoever in the world needs my volunteer services, because whenever people call him and say, would you make a donation? He said, I donated my wife to you. What else do you want? So it's a big joke between us. But this story left everybody a little bit uncomfortable. There seemed to be unanswered questions. I think my brothers and sisters were pretty much like okay with it, but I wasn't. And I think that's when my struggle with trying to understand adoption, I don't know, I never knew that I questioned it. But at that time, I think I did. And so when I told the story, I'd get emotional. And I guess maybe because I wasn't sure, why do you give up a child? Because you love somebody. You know, it's a kind of an unusual story, I do have to say. And so I had to deal with something, I don't know what. And so I would tell a story and I would start crying. And then I was in the car. I remember the day, well, I can't give you the exact date, but I remember I was leaving someone's home, got in the car, turned on the radio, and it was NPR. And there was an interview about this book entitled Origins. And they were talking about adoption and other things. And somehow during all of this, with clarity, my biological mother said, I always loved you. I didn't give you up because I didn't love you. I gave you up because Juan and Sofia needed a child, and I wanted them to have somebody in their old age. Not just me, Oscar and I wanted them, because we love them so much, to have. And I also loved you. I never stopped loving you. And our relationship was a little bit difficult because we were in the same room. I knew she was my mother. She knew I was her daughter. We didn't really deal with that. Again, if we had dealt with it, I think it would have been so much better. But we didn't. So for years, she died not dealing with that with me, and I kept going without having dealt with it. But that radio program, I mean, I swear this is the craziest thing, right? My mother spoke to me. I heard her say those things to me. And so when I left there, went home, got ready for the program that evening that I was going to present the story at, and I want you to know, I couldn't shed a tear. It was resolved. I had no turmoil about being adopted. I had no turmoil about my mother. Not that I don't think I ever questioned it, but it was resolved. I'm sorry, I'm going to need to wipe my nose here. And the angst was gone. And it is hard to pull it up and emotionally tell, because in these moth hour presentations, you tell about some struggle you're having. Well, it's no longer a struggle for me. It got resolved really strangely. So that's a long story about my early childhood, but I also believe all of that in some way is the grounding for the community service, which I have been fortunate enough to spend the last nearly 80 years of my life giving. And I think it came from that. That's the matrix of who I am.
You mentioned, I feel like it's something very typical in at least Hispanic families, brushing problems underneath the rug or not addressing them. And then also the same thing dealing with machismo growing up. So I'm just wondering, what was your mindset dealing with those types of emotions growing up?
Um, I don't think I paid attention to them. I was one of those kids I didn't spend a lot of time dealing with these situations. I just did things. I love doing things. I love being active and being out in sports and, theater and band and tennis. And I just did everything. And I had the privilege, really, of being able to do that, because had I been a part of 10, it would have been a very different story. I was sola. I was an only child when in the life of Juan and Sofia de Hoyos. And what did they do? They showered me with love. And everything they had to give was for me. So I did everything. I did all those many things which my brothers and sisters did not get a chance to do. They got to do a lot, but it's different than being an only child in a family. So when you talk about birth order, talk about confusion, I'm number 3 in one, and I'm number 1 in the other. Who am I? I never quite figured it out. I think I'm still working on it. But so I didn't have the same, emotional and machismo. No, I didn't know what that was, because I'm sorry, I was just a person doing things, and nobody got in my way. If I wanted to do it, I did it. And the guys didn't get away with it. And, I just did it. So I didn't think about those things.
So I know we mentioned that you're from the RGV, but I'm not sure if you mentioned specifically what town you were from.
I was born in Raymondville, Texas.
If you could give a quick description of Raymondville, how would you describe it?
Largely Hispanic, okay. Working class. A few Hispanics had college degrees, but I think the majority of the people I interacted with did not. Most of them maybe didn't even graduate from high school during this period. Of course, it's 80 years ago, right? We lived in the Hispanic part of town, and there was an Anglo part of town. I was always very involved with kids who were Anglo. I had some challenges interacting with Latino kids for some reason. I just was not. It wasn't as easy for me to make friends with Latinos as it was to make friends with Anglos. And mostly I think that has to do with 2 things. One of them is I didn't have an accent. I spoke Spanish without any accent at all. And I was extremely curious. I had very good grades because I love to study. I love to read. I love to learn. And Sofia de Hoyos would make dinner and take it to my room where I was studying. I was babied. I was spoiled. I was loved beyond measure.
So was your culture a major emphasis in the household?
We just lived it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about Spanish. We didn't talk about anything cultural as such. We just lived it. So whatever I know about my culture was because my parents took me to an event and I learned about it at the event, but we never talked about it at home.
Why do you think that's so?
They didn't see it as something that needed addressing. You just lived life, and this was our life.
Do you think it's something that needs to be addressed in households?
That is a good question, because I'll tell you really quickly a side story. My daughter, I don't really want to go into that story.
Okay. So we can move on. What is one of your fondest childhood memories? You mentioned being in a lot of sports and playing with some friends.
I have, aside from having issues with kids my own age, I feel like it was a very positive experience. People were kind to me. they liked me and I liked them, and adults liked me generally. And I was curious, and I was um, always smiling and vivacious and those kinds of things. And people generally like that type of a child. And so I have fond memories. I have fond memories of being taken to all the Latino events that happened, and there were a lot of them. So I was absorbing culture without really being aware of it. And I don't know, I do believe it's important because today I don't know my history. Okay. I wish it had been brought up in school. But, for example, one of the things is how little we knew about history. Basically, I had a Davy Crockett hat. I had a Davy Crockett outfit. I think we even had a little rifle because at one point, Juan and Sophia adopted a son of another sister. He was, I believe, maybe 9 years old when he came to live with us. So I was no longer an only child. And I was thrilled to have somebody to be there with me. But we both had Davy Crockett, whatever. Imagine that. We shouldn't have had a Davy Crockett. We should have had something else. If I knew my history, I would not have been celebrating Davy Crockett. Or maybe I would have, but it would have been a different celebration.
And could you explain for us why, like, what was so wrong about you celebrating Davy Crockett? What was the realization that made you realize?
Well, I don't think it was till I was an adult. I mean, till I was here in Austin, Texas, and not so much because I was upset because I wasn't being taught at the University of Texas about my culture because we didn't have any of those courses at the time that I came here. And I tried to connect with the Latino students here, not so successfully. Again, I don't know what I did, but it wasn't as successful as, say, connecting with South American students or Mexican students. I could connect and have a good relationship, learning relationship, fun relationship with Mexicans and Central and South Americans. But Mexican Americans was harder for me. And I can't tell you why. I wish I understood it better because I wanted it. And so I did very much feel disconnected. I don't know the answer, but I know that I felt I was missing something, and I couldn't connect to it. I couldn't connect to it until way later, actually, till I started Las Comadres, I think, was when I was able to connect with that. And I don't want anybody else to go through that. I really think you need to know your history. And I didn't do that. I didn't teach my children that. And the story that I was going to tell you that I will not go on camera about is one where there was some disconnect between their Latinidad and the Mexican American community.
So you mentioned earlier that your mother would cook you dinner and bring it to you while you were studying, and I feel like that was maybe something back then that was not very common, you know? I like how you mentioned if you were born into the family of 10, you would have been serving your brothers.
Right.
And so I just wanted to ask, do you think that education was a major emphasis in your household growing up? Was it something that your parents really pushed
Very
for?
much so. Because Sophia especially, I am who I am because of her. And of course, my dad had a lot to do with it. My dad would hold me on his lap. We would watch baseball games together. I loved being with my dad. But my mother was the one who pushed education. She wanted, I am her child. And she always wanted to learn herself. So when she started working as a maid at San Antonio College, she enrolled in classes. And she continued to learn, and she would do all about being a maid, what she needed to learn, the chemicals, all those things. She knew all those things. I remember that at one point when she was at our home, she was playing some game with the Anglo husband of my daughter. And man, I mean, it took him a lot to beat her because she was so smart. I mean, she got every move. And at the end, I think in the end, he won. He said, yes, I won. And I said, I didn't say a nice word, but that's who she was. I mean, she was really smart and she did love learning. And she wished she had a high school, education and could have gone on. So I think I did get that from her. And another thing that's really, really important, what she taught me were things they are the basis of my personality. There's no doubt about it. Whenever she took us, and basically it was me because David didn't come till we were 9. She would take me with her every place. And the first thing she did was, how can I help? She was always asking that. And other times, the other thing I learned from her is she didn't ask, or if she asked and they didn't say anything, she could see what needed doing and she went and she did it. I learned that. And I did it from little to today. And that's what I tell everybody. You're jealous because I have this experience or whatever. All it takes is for you to step up wherever you see the need. Just step up and do it. Because that's how I got where I am today. Because I stepped up.
So when we talked about, you mentioned your dad a little earlier, it seemed that you got a little emotional. Is there a fond memory that you have with your father growing up that you'd want to share?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them, of course. I always remember he treated me like a boy, because he was in baseball. My dad was a coach for baseball. Both of my dads were really into, especially baseball. And it was a big thing in Raymondville. All my brothers played, and all that sort of stuff. And so one would pitch the ball to me and hit it. And he would say, I think girls should play in Little League baseball because I wanted to play. He was teaching me how to pitch, how to catch, how to bat. And I was just a little tomboy wanting to do all those things with my dad. We watched football together. And I would sit on his lap and, he would tell me all the things that either baseball or football. Basketball wasn't very much his thing, but the other games were.
So what was your relationship like with your siblings? I know you mentioned your adopted brother came when you were 9, but that you still socialized with your biological siblings as well.
We always did. I mean, we were family, and we went in and out, just always. It wasn't a bad relationship. We had an okay relationship. I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say about it.
Were all of your siblings aware that you guys were all biologically related?
Yes. Okay. Everybody always knew that I was their sister, and I knew they were my brothers and sisters. So we actually have another funny story to tell you, and this just happened all the time because when people heard my story, especially sociologists or anthropologists, they'd say, tell me more. How is this? How does this work? And I say, well, I have a brother named David. I have a cousin named David. So when I have things, whenever we're doing anything, I say, brother David, brother, or brother cousin, or cousin. I had to identify people by these silly, their relationships because people didn't know who I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. So you stayed in Raymondville, I believe, up until high school, correct?
My freshman year in high school, my aunt, who I was not the first to graduate from college. The first to graduate from college was my tia, Obdulia. We called her Abby. And she ended up being supported by a Dr. Baden, I believe was his name, in Raymondville. She worked in his office, and he helped her get into the University of Texas nursing school. I don't remember what year she graduated. I have tried to find that, and I think I wasn't able to find it. But she came to UT Austin and had got her nursing degree. And so she came to Raymondville and asked my mother if I could move with her to San Antonio and help her with the kids, because she had either 1 or 2, I don't remember at that time. She had 3 eventually, but I don't remember how many were there. And I could take care of the kids after school, and she would pay for my private school. So I went to a private Catholic school called Providence in San Antonio. And my mother said she'd love to do it. And then she asked my father, who said no. And she said, so they went and talked about it, and I moved to San Antonio to stay with my aunt.
Why do you think that he said no initially?
You stay with your family. You stay home. You know the story. You're not going to leave our family. You know, you're not married. You're not old enough. You're not all these things about the girls. I'm not sure he would have felt that way about my brother leaving, but he certainly felt that way about my leaving. And of course, he didn't want me to leave. You know, I didn't want to leave them either. But are you kidding me? I get to go to the big city of San Antonio, and so my mom just talked to him about it, and he agreed.
Was leaving Raymondville ever anything that occurred to you before that experience?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And if I hadn't left Raymondville, and if I hadn't done the things, all those things that came as a result of moving to San Antonio, I'm not sure. I think things would have ended very, very differently for me.
So let's talk about now you're in San Antonio. What was your first impression of the city?
I just remember living San Antonio. It was a great place to be. I still love San Antonio. It has a special place in my heart. And the school, Providence High School, was just, oh my God, it was so amazing. It was all girls. It was an all-girls school with a boys' school across the street. And I got to meet girls from all over the place, you know, all colors, all creeds, all whatever. It was a wonderful experience. We'd go to Fiesta, we'd go to the parades, we'd eat places, we'd go to a church that was totally different people. I mean, just wow! I loved San Antonio. It was a big treat.
Was there ever a part of you that wanted to go back to Raymondville?
No, without a doubt. And I'm not sure that I can answer why, but I didn't want to go back.
What were some of the major differences you saw compared to your life back in Raymondville and in San Antonio?
Much more diverse. Okay, there was a lot more non-Hispanic people in my life. That had been the case in Raymondville, by the way. I mean, again, my friends were not the Latino children. They were the Anglo children. In San Antonio, that ended up frequently also being the case. You know, it's just because I gravitated toward conversations that were more, they were different. You know, we read books, we watched movies, we discussed all these things. I'd go stay with a woman that to this day I am in touch with. We talk once a month on a Saturday. She was my best friend in high school. And she and I would talk, we'd spend the night together frequently. 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, we were still discussing movies or books or something. And she was fabulous in math, and I was terrible in math. So she'd always have to help me with math. But she and her entire family were a part of mine. And just there weren't as many Latinas in the Providence Catholic High School at that time that I can remember. So what I remember most about school is the learning. I remember there was so much. I took Latin, I took chemistry, I took all these things that were just so much fun, even though I had taken them in Raymondville as well. One of my uncle or a cousin actually came back to Raymondville and taught chemistry in Raymondville, and I was so proud of him, so proud of him. He was wonderful. And but then in San Antonio, it just the learning seemed so much more. The exposure to so many things seemed greater, and my connections, the people I was around, had a lot more of that opportunity open to them and opened it to me.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. So I believe. Was college ever something that crossed your mind, that it was something that you wanted to do?
You know, that is a fascinating question. A fascinating question. We never talked about college at home. And for some reason or other, being in high school did not open my eyes to college. The nuns must have assumed that we came from someplace where college was talked about. We never talked about college in my home, ever. And so we were graduating from high school. I had very high marks. I think I actually placed like 14th in a national chemistry test nationally back then. And so we were, everybody was applying to college. I wasn't applying to college. And some of my friends said, "You're not applying to college?" And I was like, "No." I thought high school was what my family had aspired to. And so then they said, "Come on, we're going to San Antonio College, SAC, right up the street, whatever. Come on and go to college with us." So I said, "Okay." So I went home and said, "Mom, I want to go to college." "Sure, whatever you want," right? So I applied for college and got into college. I worked full time as well as went to school full time, got jobs at the college, was elected to the student council, and all the many things you do. Again, because my friends were I was in that environment. They were doing it. I went along. And then I kept going. And then I got married at when I was going to San Antonio College in 1966. 2 years later, I met my first husband.
So I want to circle back to, before when you were still in high school and college just wasn't a thought. What was your dream job? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I can't remember that far back. Well, yeah, I can, but I don't remember where it all started. It might have been in Raymondville. There was this doctor on TV. His name, Dr. Ben Casey. You have to be pretty old to remember these stories. And he used to wear his doctor's outfit, whatever it was, with the white flap that used to have buttons all the way up here, open. Dr. Ben Casey was just like, oh my God, I love that man. And I never missed an episode of Dr. Ben Casey. And I decided I wanted to be a surgeon. And I don't recall, maybe it might have been the math and all the stuff that I didn't want to take. I didn't want to do all those things. But eventually I ended up switching to the more social sciences. Even though the natural sciences, I read a lot in the natural sciences. I read a lot about astronomy, a lot about physics that I skip the math, just go to the words. And I get conceptually, I understand what it is, and it excites me, and I love it, and that's what I do. So that has always remained a part of my interest, but I didn't actually end up going down that path.
So what was your father's reaction to you wanting to pursue college?
That was great. He didn't have a problem with that. The only problem he had was my leaving home without them. In other words, if we had all come together, that wouldn't have been a problem. But it was leaving home at 15, 16. I guess I was 15 at the time. Leaving home that early, he was not a fan of that at all. But my mother was insistent, and he agreed.
Did your family ever reconnect in San Antonio?
So my dad stayed everybody stayed in Raymondville except me.
Okay.
Then mother couldn't find work in Raymondville anymore. I mean, the job she was doing as a seamstress went away, and other, she couldn't really find employment. So I said, come on, and my tia said, come on to San Antonio and we'll set you up here and you'll get started. Immediately found a seamstress job. So she started working as a seamstress in San Antonio. She came up. My dad stayed in Raymondville with my brother David so that he could finish high school in Raymondville. So once he finished high school, it came time for him to move. That was not easy. He didn't want to move, but my mother again. These Latinos were pretty insistent. And so they all moved up, and it was for the best. Everybody loved it. He loved Raymondville. My dad went to work at San Antonio College, where my mom was employed as a maid. I think they started him out, I forget, but he was greatly loved at the institution. My dad was easy to get along with, and they loved him, and he did excellent work as a carpenter and a painter, and they loved him. My mother, Sophia, on the other hand, they weren't so crazy about. She was insistent, she was demanding. Oh, they weren't so crazy about her. But she retired from SAC, and so did my dad.
What was your experience like those first couple of months living in San Antonio? I can't imagine, you're 15, you're at that age, you probably think you're an adult, right? But in reality, you're a child. What was it like living without your parents' supervision?
Well, I had supervision. Don't you worry about that for 1 minute. My tia and my tio were right there the whole time. But I got involved in band, because I played an oboe in Raymondville. I was terrible at the oboe, but I loved it. And I moved to San Antonio, and I played the oboe in the San Antonio Youth Symphony Orchestra. And so I had band, and to me it was all new. It was life. It was new. It was exciting. I could do all these things, and my tia and my tio supported all of that. When they got home, they took over the kids. I didn't have to. I took care of the kids from the time I got home from school till the time they got home from work. And after that, mostly they did it. So they were very supportive again. And I have been so lucky.
So let's go back to you graduated high school and your friends encouraged you to sign up for you said it was San Antonio College, correct? What was those first experiences like there?
Exciting. All these kids, we were changing classes. It was so exciting. And I loved all my classes, and I loved all my professors. And I was just in the front row, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and wanting to take it all in. And my favorite words continue to this day, tell me all about it. And I just wanted to know everything. And so I have that kind of personality, and I have that kind of eagerness that makes it easy for people to like me and at the same time have a lot of jealousy. So there have been those times in my life that have been challenging from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the barriers or the challenges that you face in those first couple of months at starting off in college?
I can't think of any. I'm sorry. I feel like every opportunity possible was offered to me. And that is, I know that's different from everybody else's story. Or not everybody else's, but a lot of other people's story. I had just doors opened.
So what do you think you're in college now? What were some of the expectations that your family had of you? Do you think they held you at a very high standard?
No, I just think they wanted me to be happy in whatever. And if I was happy at home, they were happy. I mean, that was pretty much it. We lived life. We loved life. I think my mom was happy at SAC a lot of the time. And I know my dad was happy there. We had parties on the weekend. My tia and Theo loved to party, celebrate, and we did that. And we went out to eat in Mexican restaurants, of course. Where else would you eat, right? What other food is there in this world? And I want you to know, I did not like Mexican food growing up. I hated beans, I hated rice, I hated all that stuff. I didn't like it. Today, you cannot keep me out. Every day I want beans and rice. Today I'm making up pound-wise for every bean and rice that I didn't eat when I was young. I just can't get enough of it.
Was there a specific reason why you didn't like Mexican food?
I don't know. My palate didn't like it.
So you started off going to university and college in San Antonio. And so how did you find your way here at UT Austin?
I married.
Okay.
And then my husband wanted to go to school at the University of Oklahoma. Oh, I know, bad words. But a professor he wanted to study under in philosophy, because my husband was a philosophy major. He this professor was there, and he was only going to be there for a couple more years before he went back to Germany. So we moved to Oklahoma. And I went to work for American Airlines when I graduated. Well, actually not in San Antonio. When I got to Oklahoma City, I applied for a job with American Airlines, mostly because my mother and father-in-law, my mother-in-law especially, she worked for American in San Antonio. And the station manager for American Airlines in Oklahoma City was a colleague from San Antonio who had moved to Oklahoma City. And so I interviewed for a job there, and I got a job, right? So I started working for American Airlines in Oklahoma City and went to school. I also took courses at the University of Oklahoma.
Okay. So just some clarifying questions. So you met your husband, or your first husband, while you were still at San Antonio College, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And how did you guys first meet?
Well, he recalled, I didn't, but he recalled that I was playing on the basketball team at San Antonio College. At Providence High School. Yeah. And we were playing at Incarnate Word College, and he was in the audience during this game. And it was later when we met, he said, "You were the one that," he said, "you were scrappy. You were out there getting the ball and doing all those many things." And I wanted our team to win. So he had remembered me from that, and we met at SAC, officially met at San Antonio College SAC at that time. And then we just started dating and got married.
And what were those first couple of months of y'all's relationship like?
My parents loved him. He was a very, very kind person. He got along. He talked to my dad and my mom. It was real easy. He didn't have any issues, with them. He was a military child and lived many different places and all kinds of people. So he was easy to get along with, and they loved him and they accepted him. He was just part of the family. It was just great.
And so when you guys moved over to Oklahoma, had you completed your studies at San Antonio College?
Yes, I graduated.
Okay.
With a 2-year degree. In 66 hours, I think was that's what I transferred. I think I took more than that. I had completed, and so had Doug. So then he went to Oklahoma, was accepted into this courses that this one professor was teaching that he really wanted. He was brilliant, and he was very good in his philosophy work. Very, very good.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like living in Oklahoma?
It was very different because we knew no one. I mean, when I moved to San Antonio, I had my aunt. I had her family, so it was all easy. Oklahoma, we did know somebody, but those people left, I think. I think that's what happened. My husband's philosophy teacher at SAC knew the family in Oklahoma whose house we moved into when they left. So we had a place to stay. We also went, I remember we were leaving, we packed the car, we went over to the professor's house who had been my husband's teacher at SAC, and they had just had puppies. And I think they had, like 6 or 7 puppies. We went over there to pick a puppy. We left with 6 or 7 puppies. So here we are going to Oklahoma in this Metropolitan, which is a little car. Our belongings, kind of hitched to our car, and 6 puppies. So here we go, traveling however many miles it is from San Antonio to Oklahoma, to Norman, Oklahoma. The University of Oklahoma is where we went with these puppies. And I recall letting them out of the car because we didn't want to pee in the car, right? So we would let them out and corral them and then get back in the car and head on up the way. So we ended up giving all those dogs, or most of those dogs, away while we were in Oklahoma. People would come over and say, "Oh, what a precious dog." I said, "You want him?" So they would go.
And how long were you guys in Oklahoma?
I think we were there maybe 2 years. I think it was 2 years. I stayed with American Airlines there, and then we moved back to San Antonio, and I worked for American Airlines in San Antonio Trying to remember how that worked. Yeah. And then we moved to Austin, and Doug continues his studies at UT Austin, and then I did as well.
So, what was your position at American Airlines?
I was a ticket agent.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because they had a computer. It was called Sabre. Sabre was a system that American Airlines used for reservations. And they had a kind of a computer. It was like a printer more than anything in a little terminal. And nobody knew what to do with it. They just would pull reports that they knew about. And I started playing with it and trying to figure it out and doing all those many things. And I was the first one who figured out how to connect with other places in the entire airline system through because I was curious. So I learned how to do that and was able to talk to people all over the system and had some very interesting times.
Wow. So you were pretty much a pioneer in like that computer technology.
Yeah. I wish I had been a programmer, but I wasn't. I just used it. I liked it. I like playing with things and pulling reports and stuff like that. So I enjoyed that. Something I'd like to go back to, just because this very handsome Latino man, we were still married. Yes, he worked at American Airlines as well, and we chatted a lot. And he had also gone to SAC, and he said, "I knew you at SAC." So there's two things I want to remember to tell you. He said, I was interested in asking you out. You're married. I'm not talking about that now. But I was interested, and he said, we felt you wouldn't go out with a Latino. And I said, why did you think that? I said, well, at that time I wasn't married. Said, I would have gone out with you. He said, never occurred to anybody that you would. So tied to that, there is a story that my cousin brother or brother cousin David told and tells. I haven't heard him tell it recently, but he said that, well, actually he was sitting on a wall with other Latinos, mostly guys, I guess. I don't really remember if there was girls there as well, but I remember the guys. And I was walking by, and I was the dean's secretary at that point, because while I was in school and then afterwards, I worked there as a dean's secretary for a year. I think it was close to a year. And I was walking by, and I went by and I said, hey, David. He says, hey, I kept going to my office, and they turned and he said, you know her? And he said, she's my sister. And they were like, oh my God, we didn't know that. We didn't, oh yeah, and they started talking to him. People didn't realize. I don't know whether they didn't realize I was Latina, because my last name was De Hoyos. I mean, good Lord, I wasn't married at that time. I don't know. But see, they didn't think I was Latina. And it shocked me.
Why do you think people perceived you that way?
Because probably most of my friends were not Latinos. Okay. And again, that wasn't a choice I made. The way I tell the story, I don't know. Maybe that's not the way it is. But the way I tell the story, it was hard for me to fit into Latino groups. As much as I tried, it didn't work for me. And I'm sure I did something, but I don't know what it was. I wish somebody had told me. But I didn't have many Latino friends. And that's probably, or maybe they just thought I was stuck up and wouldn't talk to them and wouldn't admit that I was Latino, because that does happen. I'm totally proud of being who I was. But I didn't know it was an issue.
And was that something that carried on and up until your time at UT?
I would say yes. I mean, it started in Bremerville. Okay. My friends became Anglo. And I tried to be a part, but I always was left out, and people were pushing me out. I never felt included. I never felt like I could have friends. I didn't feel accepted. I wish I knew. But that kept going, and I kept trying to find a way. And before I actually met Doug and married and went on with him, I did try to be around Latino. And I did want to date. I remember one man I wanted, young boy. I was very interested, and it didn't work out. He wasn't interested. I was interested, but he wasn't. And possibly others, but I do recall I did make the effort, and it just never seemed. It didn't work out.
And you mentioned you're bilingual, correct?
Yes.
Oh, so you wouldn't think it was because of a language barrier, or I know a lot of times, I get, at least in the Mexican community, like people who don't speak Spanish are alienated because they're not Mexicanos. They're
Right.
no sabo, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, it seems that you still don't understand what was the
don't.
quality behind it.
I don't know.
And so you found your way to UT. You came here with Doug, your first husband. What was the deciding factor that you wanted to enroll at UT Austin?
Oh, I was all. Once I found out about college and higher education, there was no stopping me. I wanted more, and I just kept going.
Mm-hmm. So what did your family think of you starting attending UT?
It was which part of the family? It's like my mom and dad were thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my dad had a stroke and was in his wheelchair when I had my hard copy dissertation, and I gave it to my dad, and he would sit there and he would read it. He would turn the pages and look at each page and turn the page. What more can I say?
Why does that strike such emotion with you?
He was so proud. Yeah, he was very proud. Sophia as well. My mom and dad. And all my family. All my family was very proud. Well, I do remember when my mother, my biological mother, and all of them, then both mothers were there, and all my brothers and sisters were there, and they said, how come she got a higher education and we didn't? They were asking questions at this point. And she said, you never asked. And I said, what? And she said, if you had wanted to go to college and you asked us for help, we would have helped you. But of course, I wasn't theirs to pay college for. Sophia and Juan helped me every way they could. They didn't have the funds to pay for college. I worked and got scholarships and so on. But they did everything they could to support me. I mean, my dad gave me his credit card when I got a divorce, gave me his credit card to get gas for the car. He bought me a car. It was an old car, but he bought me a car. And then he gave me his truck, at one point. So they did all they could to help. And they were just so proud. And, for no reason other than I was doing something I wanted to do and I was happy. And that's why.
And what was UT's reputation like at the time? Was it a university known statewide?
Oh, I just went to college. It didn't matter. Could have been San Marcos. At that point, I didn't have the knowledge or the experience I didn't choose a college because I chose the University of Texas. The University of Texas was where my husband was going. We were living here. We were going to school. I went there. I mean, I went to, I didn't go to Austin Community College. I worked at SAC, graduated from SAC. Then when I transferred here because we were moving to Austin. So it just made sense. And Doug was going to school here. So that made sense for me to be here.
And was Doug supportive of you continuing your education?
Absolutely. It was never a question.
Nice. Yeah. So now we're here in UT Austin. What majors did you consider when you arrived here?
I think I was psychology, sociology. I don't think education as such was But it was more the social sciences, anthropology, psychology, sociology. Those were the fields I was interested in. I ended up choosing actually anthropology, and I wanted to enter into archaeology because that was interesting. It was going to be an incredible life to be out there digging up in the digs and all those apparently very remote, what do you call it, romantically attracted in some way or other to, and by I mean the romanticism of the work, right? You saw it on TV, you read books about it, you did all these things, and it was fascinating to learn about, all these prehistory, pre-people, pre-humans, it was just fascinating. So that's the direction I went.
And what was it like attending UT in the 60s and 70s, especially like from a Latina perspective?
I swear I didn't know the difference. Nobody treated me any differently. I regret that at that time I wasn't more conscious of Latinidad and all the issues that were going there, because I felt I was, without actually expressing it in words, I was a member of the human race. It was that simple. I was a human being. I was walking around. I was learning. I was doing all these things. We lived in married student housing. Most of the students who were there were not Latinos because they weren't, in school, right? I didn't see many Latinos for a very good reason. There weren't many. I think we might have been maybe 9% of the total, 9 to 12% of the student population at UT Austin, if that high. Austin, as such, did not have a big Latino population. And I believe that the reason Austin didn't have for many years as high a Latino population is because really this is my thought, that the immigration, the 1910 revolution, as the Mexicans came into the United States, well, it was Mexico at the time, right? They stopped in Seguin, did not keep coming up to Austin. So there is more Black coming from the Northeast into this part of the state than Mexicans, because our wagon train basically, I think, went as far as Seguin, because there's a lot of Latinos up that far. And then making it to Austin was a trickle. So I think that's part of the explanation for why we don't have a lot of early Latinos. But then again, I wasn't aware of my history. I wasn't aware that I knew it was different. I knew there was a lot of Latinos who weren't as well educated as I had been fortunate enough to be. That I didn't see a lot of these families in the places where I was. I wasn't conscious. I was not aware. I would change that if I could.
And so you mentioned there is a very small percentage of Latinos attending UT at the time. Were you able to perform relationships with the few number of Latinos that were on campus?
I don't remember. Again, let's go back. Mexico, Central America, and South America. Those were my friends. I didn't know any Mexican Americans who were coming to school with me until my PhD program, at which point I met there were two in my PhD program, 2 men and myself. Aside from that, everybody else was not Latino.
So I know you mentioned a little earlier that you weren't very conscious of your own cultural background, and it wasn't really a thought that occurred much. But do you think that you ever faced any backlash or challenges or pushback from anyone here in Austin just because you were Latina?
No, the first time I became aware that it could be an issue was in San Antonio, when we were looking for an apartment. I don't remember. My aunt ended up selling the house. We moved out of the house that we rented next door. And so then we needed to find a place to stay. And so we were looking for housing. And I felt that the first time in my life, that I can currently recollect, was at that time when they didn't refuse the apartment to us, but it was clear because they offered it to somebody else, and there was no reason for it. So then we ended up finding another place, but it was housing. It was a housing in San Antonio, and that was the first time I felt it that way. I think in Raymondville, on occasion, I would feel it and see it, but that memory is that line is very thin. I don't remember it that well.
Hmm. And so you also mentioned this a little bit earlier that there was a lot of, I guess, social movements happening at the time when you were attending UT. And so the Chicano movement was going on full force at the time. What were your thoughts on it? Did you ever think of maybe wanting to join it?
I never knew what was going on.
Hmm.
The war was going on. We had, I marched. I marched in the marches in Austin for the Vietnam War. I did that. I was pregnant during some of those marches. Um, but the Mexican stuff, I didn't know about it. Can you believe it? I mean, I'm shocked that I lived in a time where I wasn't even aware of the things that were going on in our community. I wish I could change that, but I can't. And maybe because again I was insulated. I was living outside the Latino world. The apartments we lived in when I lived in Austin, so we were never surrounded by Latinos. We never lived in East Austin as such, like in the community of East Austin. We didn't live there. We lived in married student housing. We lived in other places where the community was not Latino.
And when you were, during your time here, was wanting to connect with your cultural roots ever a forefront thought?
Yes, because that's the reason I started Las Comadres. Okay. Because I was feeling my roots were slipping away. And, but, and I'm not sure. That's a part of my life I'm not really sure about. I remember feeling the desire to really connect to that. But I remember when we lived in married student housing, my husband was actually a TA in philosophy department, and some of the students would come over to our home, and we were having a dinner party for some of his students, and one of them said, "Oh, something about Mexicans," and my husband turned to him and he said, "What?" He said, "They don't belong here. These people shouldn't be whatever." And my husband said, "You need to leave our home." He said, I disagree with your take, period, but my wife is Mexican descent. Please leave our home. Because there was no conversation, there was no reason. The man was so prejudiced that, I think it was an awakening for me, because it was the first time I had actually had that happen. Okay, and I was married. I think if I didn't have the kids, it was close, we were close to, I got pregnant in that house, or in that place that we lived. And I think that might have been the first time I really dealt with it face on.
And what was your initial reaction to hearing that?
I was like, what? What is he talking about? What? I'm brown. I'm brown. I've always thought that I looked Latina. What is he talking about? What is he saying? What is he doing? I don't understand. So that might have been the first time that I had to deal with that. And that's another thing. I did try to connect with the Hispanic community here in Austin. It wasn't easy. Churches are not welcoming places, or many churches are not welcoming places. You go to church and you really don't make friends. You go places and you really don't make friends. I would go to the Hispanic Chamber. I would try, but that's a business-oriented thing, and they wanted to know, can you buy something for me, or do I need to buy something from you? Or who are you? You're not anybody we know in the community. Go right past you. That sort of experience. All those kinds of things kind of started to my awareness. Maybe that's it. And I remember that student of my husband's may have been the first awakening for me of this consciousness that may have been below the surface for all these years.
And so, you did mention earlier that you were part of the walk for the Vietnam War. What was that experience like? Did you ever get into any other political, social movements of such?
I don't recall anything past that because I was pregnant. Right? After that, I had twins. Are you kidding me? I was just lucky to, be able to finish school and, do those kinds of things. And actually, I didn't finish school. I was working at the UT Press here at the University of Texas under Frank Wardlaw, who was an amazing director. And he invited me when he left here and went to Texas A&M to go with him to continue supporting the work that he was doing and go there. And my husband and I talked about it at the time and said, no, we don't want to leave Austin, but yeah, I really considered it. But no, I went to work full time. Didn't finish my studies right away.
What jobs were you holding down while studying at UT?
Yeah, an interesting story. When I entered my PhD program, I had the most longevity of employment at UT of anybody in the entire department. So it just goes to show how long I had been working at the University of Texas in so many different jobs. All of them are mostly secretarial or administrative assistant. I actually ran a journal called the Hispanic Journal. Golly, now I can't remember the name of the journal. But the provost had brought the journal with him, Hispanic American Journal of his. I don't remember the name, but many of those jobs had been. And then in my archaeology, I went to work as an administrative assistant, and then I worked as an editor there. So I had editorial jobs or administrative jobs at UT Austin.
And so why did you decide to continue education and go for a PhD?
That is an interesting story because I was, again, being an administrator at the journal, and I was visiting with the provost, who was my boss, and I said, I want to do what you do. How do we do that? I mean, what do I have to do? Because he was a kind man, and he said, well, you need higher education. You've only got a BA, so you need to have minimal of a PhD. And I said, well, how do I do that? And he said, well, you're probably going to need some help. So here's some fields you could consider. And one of them was education. Of course, I loved education. I wanted everybody to have the same opportunity and joy out of learning that I did. So I applied to the community college leadership program. And that's the PhD that I worked on.
And so I know your PhD has an emphasis on community college management. What drew you to that topic specifically?
Well, I'm good at managing things. And I felt this is something I can do. I just need to figure out, what's a foundation that's required in order to be able to do that. And when I first started exploring it, I didn't understand fully what community colleges could do because I was in a 4-year program, right? Even though I had been to a community college and I loved my experience there, and, just kind of trying to put all those pieces together, and became aware that it was a stepping stone for so many Latinos. So many students, period. I don't know that I focused on the Latino part of it as much when I first started as I did as I learned and went through my program. Then I understood that the path here required much more. Opening doors to a 4-year institution was really hard, but you could start at a community college, and the instruction was great. My education was second to none. And I could open those doors because that's part of what Las Comadres was all about, opening doors for others. I had been so lucky. I needed to be able to open doors for others. There weren't many like me. I became aware of someplace along the way that there weren't that many Latinos doing what I was doing. And that needed to change because I did look around and they weren't there. But it wasn't like, it took me a while to feel the emotional connection to, where are we? What's going on here? This is not okay with me. I need to do something about it. Or, it took me a long time to grow up, to become conscious.
If you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself during your time here at UT, either in your bachelor's or in your PhD program?
I don't know that my advice about education would be any different than my advice in general. And it's, you really need to know yourself. And then follow the dream to the best of your ability, because it's not easy. It's not easy. You know that, and so many students know that. If your passion, I've known students who got degrees in biology or chemistry or math or something else, and they went to work in the field as opposed to a teacher, right? They were never happy. They needed to be helping. They needed to be around people. A job in a lab is not around people. You are working on slides. You are doing, you're working in the field of your study, but you're not connecting with people. And I feel that a lot of Latinos, which may be an experience many other people have, but I'm just focusing on the Latino aspect of it. It's about people. When you're in the community, you're with people. You're surrounded by music, you're surrounded by culture, you're surrounded by food. These are things you need in your life. And many of us who get away from it for whatever reason, you end up missing it. You end up thinking, when was I happiest? Maybe you don't sit down and explore it in those ways, but what happens is you feel the lack of. And what it is, it's the lack of the community that we lived in. And just, my advice is be compassionate. Think about what you really love. Will it support you? If you want to go into the arts or music, it's a damn tough living. It's a damn tough living. So do you like math? Can you be an accountant? What are these other things that'll pay the bills? And you can do that on the weekends and after work. Because you do have a life after work, It's only 8 hours of a day. There's all the rest of the time that you can be doing things you love, because it's not a supported living. Okay. So, I would say have a clearer picture of things, of your values, of your passion, of how to keep body and soul together while you're making life. I think there's so much more to life than the way we look at it.
That seemed to strike some emotion with you. What are you thinking about right now?
That we make choices, maybe not fully cognizant. Again, you can't be. It's not that you can't be. It's that's not the way we learn about making choices in life. Like what you've heard me tell you is I went from here to here, did this, did that, because it happened, it came in my life, it was in the flow of things. But instead of that, in order to be the fullest human being you are, our system, our education system, our family structure, all these things, being a human being didn't come with a handbook. Making the most of your life doesn't come with a handbook. And we miss so much of what we could give the better world that we could have. Because we don't have that picture. You know, you're born and you just go so many ways, and sometimes different things push you in different directions. But if we could figure out how to help humans find more of who you are and how you can be fulfilled and give, it would be better. So, but we don't. Again, we go from one thing to another. Life pushes you this way, that way. You end up, you marry a person in the military, you travel over the world, you do all kinds of things. It just, life takes you in different directions. But if we could be more prepared to make good choices and do things, I guess, in the end, I wish we could do something like that.
So, when you graduated, when you received your PhD, what was your family's reaction like? What was that experience like? Just knowing that you completed that higher education.
I didn't have to go to class anymore. That's what I thought. Oh man, I don't have to get up in the morning and go to class again, or write another paper or do another whatever. Those are the things that I remember feeling that relief of it's done. But Mom and Dad, of course, were very, they're beyond the moon proud. And but it was interesting. I know that we would go sometimes to places, and I didn't even want to say I had a PhD because some people, their reaction was not positive. It's like, oh, now you think you're something really hot. You think you're hot stuff because you have a PhD. I didn't even need to tell you. I mean, it's not important. I didn't tell people that I had a PhD. I'd seen that reaction. It wasn't important for them to know. I did this for me. I didn't do it for anybody else. Of course, I wanted my parents to be proud of me. But Juan and Sophia were the only people I needed to be proud of me. And my children, who helped me with my PhD, helped me through my work and all that. I didn't need anybody else to know about it. And I still don't run around trumpeting it to the world. But if somebody's being called a doctor, then by golly, you're going to call me doctor too. But if everybody's just Nora or Maria or Jose or whoever you are, you don't need to call me doctor anything. But if we are, if you're calling it out for somebody, then I do want that to be known. But it was just, okay, I made it to this stage, and I keep thinking, ooh, I want to go to take that class. Ooh, I want to take that leadership program. Not because it's the leadership program, I like the topic, or I like this or like that. I haven't stopped learning. I haven't stopped being active in that. And that's part of what I would love to see more of in our schools, that passion for learning and being I'm just being curious. I would like to see much more of that.
And so you mentioned that your children were already born at the time that you received your PhD. What was motherhood like for you in those early years? I can't imagine running after twins.
Oh, it was terrible. But, I can say there must be good genes in my family. I mean, I think that's part of it. But the other is being a mother and running after your children. If you keep up the activity, you're going to be in great health when you're older. Really. Because taking care of children requires a lot of running around, of course, washing clothes, doing all those many things that you need to do, keeps you very active and very, very busy out. You don't get to sleep a whole lot when you're working on a PhD and you've got a family. Or, if you're working 3 jobs and taking care of a family, no, there's not a lot of sleep time. But for me, it was the sports. I took them, and of course, I had a boy and a girl, which meant they couldn't do the same thing, right? So I had the boy over here and the girl over here and running around. And lots of families deal with that. I'm aware of that. But that was a challenge. And by that time, I was divorced. The kids were a year old when I got a divorce. So they were small. And so it did require a lot of, and it was very lonely. It was a very lonely life because especially at that time, I would have loved to have gotten remarried earlier. It was 11 years. My kids were 11 years old when I remarried. So it was hard to find relationships or build relationships. Most of the relationships were couples, and it was me. And then I had to have childcare. So, it was a really tough time. And I think another very important understanding on my part is I wasn't fully grown up when my children were born. So there was a lot of me. I wanted to fulfill me, but I also needed to be a mother. And I'm not sure I did a good job at either one of them. But so it was a tough time. Yeah.
And so how was that experience, being a single mother and balancing that PhD course? What was your mindset like at the time?
Well, I had the good fortune. What can I tell you? I'm so grateful. I When I started my PhD program, one of the professors, I met him first, I believe. And we were talking about kids and school and stuff like that. And I mentioned where my kids were going to school and how much we liked it. And so it was a great school. And they had a number of children. And his wife was also teaching in another department, but at the same level in terms of it was education. And so we became friends. He and his family and my family became friends. So, and we started consulting around the country together because I ended up becoming focusing on coursework that allowed me to do consulting around the country. So I would travel with them or separately to do some of this consulting, and either they would keep my kids or I would keep their kids. But it was always at their house. They kept my kids at their house, and when I took care of their children, I went to their house because they had 5 kids. I just had 2. So, and they had a huge house, so it was easier to go to their house. And so we became friends, and I had a support system. Yeah. I fell into a support system that made it possible to do a lot of the stuff that I needed to do to continue to grow. And they were both professors, both PhDs, both, working in the field and I ended up working with them as well. So, it was just, compared to anybody else, it was easy. Okay, I know it was hard. Yeah, it was hard. But compared to other people's lives, it was easy.
So you got your PhD. What was one of your first jobs once you left UT?
Well, I went to work with my colleagues, and again continued traveling and consulting all over the country. And then I kind of was unhappy with education and going into jobs. Finding jobs was really, it felt like your connections, and it didn't feel like it was on merit. I didn't feel that I was applying for jobs and being considered for jobs on merit, and it's like who you knew. And I didn't like that. I didn't like it. So I stepped away from it for a while. I didn't go straight. I taught at Austin Community College. Loved my classes. They were on group development, good group dynamics. I loved my classes at Austin. I only taught actually one semester because of my travel. It was really hard to have teach a class and be traveling. So I ended up not continuing that, but I loved my classes, and I loved my chair, and I loved Austin Community College in teaching. But I kind of stepped away from it, trying to figure out what is the best path here. I'm not liking what I see. And then I ended up going went into the computer field, chose the computer field, but always kept up my involvement with education, opening doors for people, trying to help them, make sure things continued in that path. But I ended up stepping into the computer field because I was fascinated by computers, and working at MCC, Microelectronic and Computer Technology Corporation, which was a huge, one of the first technology companies in Austin, which was made up of people from all over the U.S. that were part of this, and including artificial intelligence and design, and I mean, just many of those early fields. So that took me in a different direction. You know, I was all of a sudden involved in the computer field, and I was elected to the IEEE, International Electronic Computer Corporation. I don't remember the name. It's a long name, and then ended up in the work, computer assisted work kind of thing, and became a secretary to the group internationally. So I reached a national level of exposure and connection to people, and used a lot of my knowledge from my community college leadership program in that field, because the knowledge is transferable. It hardly matters where it comes from, but the things I learned there helped me very much to keep things organized, to manage people, to do all these many things that I had learned in my community college leadership program. And I was able to that established me in an international setting as well as a national setting, unintentionally. Again, excitement, energy, loving it, jumping in. They say need help, and I'm like, I'm there, and I stepped in, and I just did it, right? I continued what I started as a child all the way up. And then with the learning that I had along the way, and the fabulous professors that I studied under who helped me understand management and group dynamics and those many things, I brought all those things to bear on making this happen, which was what I had hoped. I would be a college president, a community college president at some point. And so I used all those things, and it moved me into places and positions that I might not have had I stayed in the education field totally. So then I was in the community college field and in the technology field, and trying to bring those two together, which is a place I met my second husband, the man I'm currently married to, and created Las Comadres.
So I want to clarify something. I understand that you have a consulting firm, correct?
Yes.
Comstock Connections.
Correct.
Where in the timeline of your career path does that fall into?
After completing my PhD is when I was working with my two professors that we used to take care of each other's children. At that time is when I started my own consulting company.
So this was before getting into the technology field and
Yes.
community college.
Yes.
Oh, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we clarified that. And so I wanted to kind of circle back to you working in the technology field. At the time, I'm assuming this is in the late 70s, early 80s, correct? So a lot of people coined that as, like the technology revolution. That's when computers really started to become a more known thing. So what was it like witnessing that at firsthand, and especially compared to now,
So exciting. It was an amazing, amazing experience. Ground floor. I mean, really, it was just, it's been around for a long time. Computers been around a long time. But working at MCC, bringing the knowledge that I had from all this PhD work, it was a very exciting time. I mean, the beginning of AI, really, at that time, MCC had some very incredible work that was being done in that field, as well as design. I mean, all these things were happening, and I was around these people, and I was listening to their conversations. I could contribute zero, but I was there. I think that's the most exciting part of it. I was there. I was seeing it, and I looked around, and there were very few Latinos. Again, I become more and more aware as I'm in these, at that time, rarefied kind of places that were not there. And I look around, I was like, What's wrong with this picture? Why aren't we here? That question began to really nag me. Why aren't we here? And even again in my PhD program, there weren't that many, right? So here we are. I'm finding myself, why am I here and they're not here? I was lucky. That is, John Rouge, one of my dissertation person, Dr. Rouge, he wrote many books, but one of the books he wrote was about luck and as a factor in all these things that happen. Honey, I was lucky. As you hear me tell my story, I was lucky. I was at the right place at the right time, able to take advantage of the opportunity. So here I am around all these people dealing with this questions about technology and the future and how it fits, and bringing all the companies in the U.S. This was a U.S. company. Semitech included non-U.S. companies, but MCC did not. So this was just U.S.-based companies, but all the big companies were there. Apple, IBM, you name them. They were all there. And so I got to hear them talk about it because it's not my field. I mean, I don't know those things, but I learned a lot. I felt the passion. I understood the importance and wanted to open more of those doors. So, and people kept, because I was there, they invited me to other things. So it just opened more doors for me. And then Las Comadres comes around and it's like, man, I got a lot of doors I can open. Mm-hmm. Why is this? I can't just keep it here. I've got to open the doors for others because there's very few like me here. And nobody differentiated me, okay? I never felt discrimination in any of those places. But I knew others like me weren't there. And I missed it.
So I do want to talk about Las Comadres, but before we jump there, I understand that you also spent some time as a ACC trustee. Yes. What was that experience like? What was the campaign experience like?
Okay, so Las Comadres started way before ACC, okay, trustee. Okay, so I had been running Las Comadres for 15 years before I ran for the trustee at Austin Community College. And the reason I did that was in 2015, I was sick and tired of administrative work, and Las Comadres required so much. I ran Las Comadres for 15 years. I did data entry. I did programming. I did fundraising. I did all of it. It was me. And when I had some money, I would get a little help here and there. And of course, I had a board. I mean, it was a nonprofit. We had a board. But I was doing all the work. And at the end of 15 years, I was like, I am up to here with 20-hour days and sitting at the computer typing all those email addresses because all those 20,000 comadres got invited by me. Okay, so I was so sick of it. I just didn't want to do I wasn't through with Las Comadres, but I was through with that. I didn't want to do that anymore. Where was all this passion and all this curiosity to do things when all I did was type email addresses and invite people, that sort of thing. So 2015, I said, I'm out of here. And I really didn't mean it. I didn't mean like, I'm out of here, but I don't want to do this anymore. So Marta Cotera, a well-known activist and advocate in this community, said at a Christmas, I remember the Christmas event, she said, Lupe Sosa is retiring from ACC. We need to find someone or ones to run in her place. And I said, me, I'll do it. And I said, well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep looking, but I'll do it. I'm community college PhD, love the community college. I've got years of experience. I'm known in this community, blah, 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 you name it. It's my turn. It is. I'll do it. So I went home, talked to my husband. He's like, we're all in. Go for it. And I ran for office. Now, through Las Comadres, we had created a program in 2007 called the Texas Public Policy and Civic Engagement Program to open doors for Latinos as well, but this program was for Latinas because Las Comadres is Latina, women-based. I said, where are all these women that should be running for office? Where are they? Nobody's training them. I asked various people who were in political office and said, who are you mentoring? Who are the people coming up? I ain't had any. And then when they retired, there was no one trained, ready to run for those slots. So I said, this has got to change. Let's do this. I got the board's approval. The board helped. We put this together. And then finally, it can take you forever to put the curriculum together. And finally, I said, done. Class number 1, let's do it. We pulled it together in 2 weeks. Maggie was one of the instructors who came and participated in that first session, that first class of the Texas Public Policy and Civic Engagement Program. And we made up the curriculum, largely me with a lot of help. I'd call people and we'd put a curriculum together, we'd find people to do it. Second class, now I'd have to put the second class together, because if you wait and you try to do it perfect, you're never going to get the silly thing done. So we just started doing it that way. And then it ran from 2007 till 2016. But it was so much work. I mean, talk about the administrator. I had to do everything again. I had to find the food. I had to recruit the people. I had to help select the people. I had to find the speakers. I had to find the space. I had to take the food there. All these, I had to do it all. But it was exciting. We had excellent women who went through the program, and the people who taught in that program, stellar. So it was a fabulous, fabulous program.
So it seems like Las Comadres was a really major influence on you becoming an ACC trustee. And forgive me for jumping around in our timeline, but let's talk about Las Comadres para las Américas.
Oh, we can finish the trustee part.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Because that's okay. Because of Las Comadres, the trustee thing was easier than it might have been. I knew a lot of people. A lot of people in this town knew me. It didn't matter where in this 7-county area there you went, people knew me. Not because I was with Las Comadres, and people knew about Las Comadres. That's all there is to it. And then when I went and I made presentations to the different groups that we needed to talk to, and we went as a group, became kind of like a group of people who were running for these, whatever it was, all the various positions that were open in our county, city, county, school district, everything. We would all end up at the same place making our little pitches to these people. We learned from each other. It was an exciting time. We were scared. We had 1 minute, we had 3 minutes, and you got to tell your story. And then they voted on endorsements, which I hate. I think endorsements should go away. I don't like endorsements. But that's the way the system was running at the time. So then they would vote on who they were going to endorse. So we would be there at the endorsement meetings waiting to hear who got selected to be endorsed. I was fortunate. Again, they heard me talk about community college, what I didn't understand, and I kind of understood it, but not really. All the questions they were asking me were not questions I could do anything about. Okay. They wanted to talk about, I was a part of 9 who were the number of trustees at the college. I could make my recommendation, I could do my talk, but make a decision about it and change what's happening, it's not that easy. And it's not because the board might not be interested, it's because of the relationship between the board and the person you hire. The only employee at that college is the president. Okay? Everybody else works for him. He works for you. That's it. That power relationship is a really interesting one, and one I would love to write about. I really want to sit down and take it all apart, because I don't like it, because I don't think it does the job that's supposed to be done. And if you're going to change something, you're going to have to step up. So that's a challenge I haven't taken on yet, to really pull it together, but I have a lot of people that agree, and it's just kind of putting together a thought piece about how could we do this better? Okay, 'cause I don't think it works as well as it should. So the community college experience, I think 2 years into that particular experience, I was done. But I was elected by my community for 6 years. I maintained, I stayed, I attended every single thing that ACC had an opportunity, had a door, had a seat, had a whatever. I went to every single one. You ask anybody. I was the one that never missed anything. I went to everything. I represented the institution. I went out and I met the students. I helped us, I was also on the foundation board. I helped the foundation. I was in all the way, knowing fully well that the changes that I thought needed to be made were not going to happen at the board level.
So that was one of your major challenges. You just kept heading on, almost the bureaucracy of it all.
Yeah. And then because I knew many people, I knew many things. And how do you surface things you know without endangering somebody else's job or whatever it is? And those things come into conflict because the only way you could know those things would be through people who worked in the institution. And I'm not willing for anybody to lose their job over that.
I do want to circle back to Las Comadres. So could you tell us, if you were to tell a stranger, what is the organization? How would you describe it?
It is a sisterhood. It is a connection. It is a way to serve, because the organization wasn't built to benefit any one person, but to bring the community together, to build community. And that's something there was Las Comadres in Austin, started through Elizabeth Garcia, who has been deceased about 10 years. And Elizabeth and Veronica Rivera, both attorneys. And they brought a bunch of people together and said, hey, we don't know each other, and our moms had comadres, and we want to have comadres, and so, we're bringing people together. Well, all they knew was attorneys, but I was not an attorney, and I had been invited, and I knew everybody else, and so we kind of met a couple of times. It was potluck, and but then it's a lot of work, let me tell you. It is a lot of work. And so they said, we don't want to do this anymore. Sorry, this takes too much time and we don't have it. So I said, I'm going to take this over and I'm going to take care of it here in Austin. Well, when it went international, I consider myself the national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. I did not start the Austin network, but what I do know is that there were lots of other places around the country who had similar things. They were all over because we needed each other, Latinas, and so do others. I mean, it's not that it's exclusive to Latinas needing each other. What we do can be reproduced 100 times, 1,000 times. But what we do is we bring people together. Now, it started out with this concept of comadre. The relationship between a family or a mother and her daughter and her friends. But for me, it became much broader. I created the broader exposure of sharing that social capital. I looked at it. I had been on, you name a board, I was on it. You name whatever, they knew me. It's that kind of thing. I had that. And it was, and I said this previously in the interview, what do you do with all of this? You can't take it with you, whether it's physical money in the bank or whether it's connections. You can't take it with you. So how do we expand that? Expand it as many ways as it can be. When somebody's looking for a job or whatever you need, you ought to be able to come to a comadre to help you, or if she needs help, you help her. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. It is a two-way street. And so today I need help, tomorrow you need help. However that works out. And your children might need help or whatever. So it's information, it's connection, it's social capital outside the immediate Latino community, because a lot of us have that social capital. It wasn't just me. Everybody else that I knew, all of my comadres had social capital. And so it was, how do we share it? How do we pull this all together? And furthermore, how do we develop? How do we continue to grow? How do we open doors for you? How do we put you in the path of a PhD? How do we put you in a path to being the mayor of the city? How do we put you in a path, whatever it is, dream it, and we'll help you. You're not alone. We're here together. And we're a support system. That's what it is to today.
So would you say that the vision that you had for Las Comadres para las Americas when you took over was to create that network, to create that path towards social capital for Latinas?
Well, there are two things I want to clarify. One is I had been thinking and had actually used the name Las Comadres for a television program that I was planning that was tied to health and wellness. And so this had been ongoing in my brain because for the longest time I thought, where do you find Latinas? Where do you find Latinas? Where do I go and meet them? The only place I knew was the chambers. But the chambers are business organizations. They're for a different reason. And frequently, if somebody doesn't recognize your name, they're not necessarily interested in getting to know you. That's not always true. It's a little harsh. But that was the experience I had, and apparently others had it as well. And the same thing, I said, churches aren't welcoming. It's also very true. You go to the church, you're like, hello, but nobody takes you home. Nobody invites you. You don't build community unless you spend a whole lot of time there. So building community is very difficult. So Las Comadres had that potential to build community in an informal setting in the potlucks and all of this. Again, and this was happening all over the country. People were doing it. As the internet became more accessible, information became, we found communities that had had this same experience for 15 years, 10 years. So it wasn't a new concept, okay? I took it to a national level, only was able to do that because of my pioneering hat for technology. And my second husband, Jack Bell. Without Jack, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. He facilitated it. He provided the computers. He provided the computer technology. He kept us safe in terms, he was a security person. He understood all that, kept us safe, helped me manage all the stuff you have to know about computers and the domains and all those many things. Jack helped me with all of that so I could focus on creating systems, and he took care of the basics. He took care of the back room, took care of all those things. All those things made it possible. So when I went national, it had a different vibe, it had a different feel, it had a different overall vision and mission.
So I do want to backtrack just a little bit, back to your time as an ACC trustee.
Okay.
You mentioned that 2 years in, those 2 years in of your 6-year term was when you recognized, like, this might not want to be something that you want to do forever. Was there a specific thing that happened that made you say, I'm done?
Well, not one thing, but the cumulative experience of 2 years of seeing the things that needed to be changed. You're not the one that can make that change, at least not in the short term. You might be able to craft policy. Policy is supposed to be the way boards work, okay? Aside from policy in the budget, the dollars and the policy, you really don't have a whole lot of other things you can do. But there's a difference between policy, creating and writing policy, and implementing policy. Okay, there's a big difference. You can write the policy, but you're not in control of the implementation of it. That's the disconnect. Here's what we want. Here's the way it gets implemented. Frequently, you don't get to connect those two. And it's that disconnect that, for me, I think was the biggest challenge. I mean, you can write beautiful policy, but if you don't have any control, and if you're not willing to do what needs to be done in terms of removing a CEO or a president that isn't doing what the board really intended, if you don't have the guts to do what needs to be done, you're nowhere.
Did you feel that your other board members didn't have those same guts that you did?
We were at different places. We were just at different places, different experience, different. I mean, most of those people had been on the board for a very long time and had been around the institution, which has accomplished many things and is still short, way short in many places. but amazing faculty, dedicated, loving, really caring for students. Yeah, that was all there. I mean, that's what kept you there. That's what you really wanted impact on, and that's not your job. Your job is to stay up here at this level and keep your eye on the policy level. At the same time, be aware of when numbers aren't being hit or stuff like that. And you can ask. You can ask for change. There are things you can do, but you can't make them happen. It's not, you can be part of the strategic planning process, but it goes back to you can't make it happen. It has to happen over here, and you have to, on the operations side, and you and your board members have to be in sync that if these things aren't happening in a timely fashion, you've got to remove the CEO. And that is a tough, tough, tough decision when nationally people are looking for the same kind of people you're looking for. And a CEO search is time consuming. If you're going to do it well, if you're going to do all these things that need to be done, it's just a whole lot of work that goes into it. And sometimes it's not going to happen.
Thank you for that. So I want to circle back to Las Comadres. So you mentioned that technology was a really big aspect on the expansion. I was just wondering if you could go into more detail about that.
Sure. Las Comadres, lots of people told me this. Okay, let me back up a little bit and tell you how it happened at all. It happened in Austin, right? When I started, it started in Austin in 2000. For all in between 2000 and 2003, I worked really hard at building that organization. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. You know, I would show up, we had a hostess, I'd go to the hostess home, and it was me and the hostess. Okay. And sometimes we'd get 5 people, and it was like, yay, we got 5 people. It wasn't anybody on the board. It was just me and 5 other people, or 3 other people. And the next time it'd be me and the hostess. So for years, I kept this up. Well, I think it was a year and a half or something like that. We kept it up. I kept it up. But some friends in the Austin American Statesman were aware of the things. Part of I had more of a reputation before Las Comadres started that got people interested in what I was doing with Las Comadres. My reputation came from the fact that the computer thing I had done before, and I was internationally connected, brought people's attention to me because they didn't have the information I had because I was nationally connected or internationally connected. So what happens is I would bring news to this community that they didn't have access to. So they were curious. Who is this person that knows more than we do? Where's she getting her news? How's she getting this information? Because I would post my news to my network. So then I got an interview. The Austin American Statesman did an article that was like 2 full-page spreads on, and it ended up being on me, which the focus shouldn't be on me. The focus should be on the work. But it ended up being talking about me and how Las Comadres came about and history about me. A lot of this is in that article, and it goes on and on. Anyway, that article caused 500 people in Austin, Texas, to email me and say they wanted to be part of Las Comadres. Oh my God. We had been having trouble getting 4 people there. 140 people showed up at the first Comadrazos. Amalia Rodriguez Mendoza had a Christmas party. We had not only flooded her house, but all her front yard and out into the street. There was so many of us there. Marta Cotera had one. There was so many people there. We couldn't do introductions because you can't introduce 140 people. And the guys, this was so funny, so many of our guy friends would drive by and say, you had a really full house at that Comadrazo. And they would say, people park 10 blocks away to walk to the Comadrazo. I mean, it was, and not only in Austin, from Austin, it went viral, okay? Very first experience of something happening virally was the Comadres becoming a national experience. People would get on airplanes, and they would hear conversations about Las Comadres. I didn't know these people. And people would be talking about this. And so Henry Cisneros and his wife, they had a comadrazo in San Antonio. And then he would go around the country and say, oh, they had a comadrazo in my home. Things like that were happening. I mean, it was just wild. I couldn't keep up with it. There was so much happening. This sister would call that sister. The internet was just kind of starting, okay? This couldn't have happened before today, that period. It could not have happened because the technology wasn't there. So here we come into a new time, and it's all new, and I can do it because I have a husband, a computer at home, I have all the technology networks that I need, I have exposure in those fields, I know all these people. I was the right person at the right time. That's the only thing that differentiates me from anybody else who would have started this group. Okay. Today they can start them like that, grow really, really fast. Are you kidding me? I had to work really, really hard for every one of those emails that I entered in and invited. And in the beginning, it was just an email. I didn't necessarily know your full name. Later on, I added a name, a first name, a last name, and a phone number. And then we added other bits of information. But for years, all those people who came Bar Las Comadres, I don't know who they are. I don't even have those records anymore. Actually, my husband says he does. But so it all happened because of when it happened. Okay, that's the only unique thing about this is when and that Jack Bell was involved. Mm-hmm. And so that, again, went viral. 500 women replied saying, I want to join you. We started. These comadrazos were huge. Somebody from, the next Comadres Network was started in Ohio. And they invited me to be a speaker. And I stayed in her home. She picked me up because I said, listen, I can tell you how to do this. I don't need to go there. And they were now, no, we want you to come. Well, my husband, computer person, had traveled all over the world setting up systems for companies he worked for. And he had a gazillion air miles. And he didn't want to set foot in an airplane. It was like, no way. I got all those air miles. So when people invited me, I could get there. I didn't have to pay for anything. I had the air miles. And then I said, well, I don't have any money. I can get there. Oh, we'll pick you up. You can stay at my home. So that started the model of how we continued to expand to other cities. I can get there. You need to pick me up and I need to stay in your home. Sure, no problem. I got to know the goldfish. I got to know the cat, the kids, the husband. I had amazing experiences in people's homes.
That's amazing. And so you've mentioned Jack Bell, your second husband. So he was obviously a very integral part in the expansion
without him.
And creation. So can we talk briefly about, how did you guys meet? I think you mentioned it was when you were working in the technology field, correct?
That's right, yeah. He worked at a company called Cybe Systems. And it's cover your behind. And it was a small black box, we call black box company at the time. And I had left MCC at that time and was, trying to, Unix was a system that I was familiar with. And this was a Unix company. And Jack worked there and we met and, then we ended up together.
That's
and he wasn't
awesome.
afraid of having, a lot of men did not want a woman with 2 children at that time. I think things are a little different today, but at that time, 2 children was a baggage. Jack didn't mind. He loved children. And they were 13 years old. Oh my God. That's a whole nother story because at that point, they considered themselves nearly my equal because they're 13 years old, right? They didn't need a dad. So you can imagine what life was like in our household.
What was that family dynamic like?
Yeah, it's like, who are you to tell me? You're not my dad, right? You're not my dad. And that was really tough. But Jack managed it very well. And both of the children thought that he made a huge difference in their lives. He guided them. He was young. He was 10 years younger than I was. And part of how we can get away with that is I'm so vibrant. I jump up and down. I still do a lot of things like, so I could get away with that 10 years difference. But this man could manage these kids, work with them, teach them things in spite of all the challenges. We managed to get through a lot of stuff. And they both say he was an amazing human being who guided them and gave them a lot of wisdom and love.
That's awesome. And especially, help him being such an integral person in this expansion. And so I also wanted to ask you, what do you think makes a perfect member of Las Comadres? Or is there a picture perfect member that comes up to mind?
There is not one comadre description at all. It is all Latinas, all colors, all shapes. We're all learning from each other all the time. The only thing that I have to say, and sometimes other Latin American countries have expressed an interest in having comadres there, and I said, well, one thing you need to understand is your maid is as welcome in here as you are. You leave your title at the door. When you come into a comadrazo, it's comadres and an abrazo. And when you leave your title at the door, you leave all those things at the door. And people said these things in Dallas. They said, wow, we really love this because there's we're all in here. We're all together. Yeah, you might find out she's CEO of such and such or be an elected official or whatever. But that's not what it was about. We're all here. We're all equal. We're all hermanas. I don't care what color you are. It is a little bit harder, I think. We're having to be willing to expand more to Asian and Black, especially Black. Black Latinas have not been treated well. I'm sorry. I don't care where you are if you're Black. It is an issue. And we all have to accept that and work on it. So there's not as many Black Latinas in our network as there need to be because they are welcome. We're all welcome. Everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter. You can be white. You don't have to be a Latina because we expanded it. We changed the wording to mujeres with a corazón latino. As long as you care about the Latino community, and it's way more than the Latino community. You got to care about everybody. But if you work with us in social work or as a counselor or social worker or whatever you might be doing, if you care about the community and you're willing to hear things about the white community which are not complimentary, you're welcome to be here. And if I need a different perspective, you say, okay, I agree with all this, but here's my perspective, which adds a piece to what, if it's all Latino, it looks like this. If white gets brought in, it looks like this. That's helpful because we all learn and then we expand our capacity to be inclusive. And so that's what we want. We want inclusive and we have to work at it. It's go back to creating this playbook or this manual on how to be a human being.
And what are some of your favorite projects that the organization has done in the past?
The Texas Public Policy and Civic Engagement Program which was our training for candidates and people who work in public office or public offices, government. That was a really good program. I love that program. But the other one that I started that one in 2004, but actually 2006, I think, is the year that we use as our 2007. We started book club. And we started book club because there was a young woman working in my office, helping me at the office, and I never paid anybody because I didn't have any money, right? So she came in and she was typing whatever she was done, and I looked around and said, oh, here's a book by a Latina that you might enjoy reading. She had just graduated from the University of Texas like a couple of months before, and she held that book. She said, I've never read a book by a U.S. Latina. We'd all read Latin America, right? We knew the authors out there because they teach them at the university. Latin American literature, Latino, written by somebody in the United States, unheard of. Therefore, she was like, oh my God, this is fabulous. And I went, wow, that's a need. So, but I must say that about 5 years before that, I wasn't aware of it either. So I thought, okay, me 5 years ago, her today, there's a problem here. We need to fix it. So we started book club. And at that time, the way we could do it was teleconferences because we used the phone. So we would interview authors on the phone. We taped them. I have all the recordings of all this stuff. And it was noisy. People were washing dishes in the background, the dog, the kids, all of this stuff, because we didn't know how to mute. So all of those were there. And then all the way until COVID, which was a very challenging time. And actually, when I decided to retire in 2015, that started some tough times for us because transitions in technology and people trying to say hey, email's going away. Well, it didn't. But it was really challenging because we were losing people because of technology. COVID, Yahoo went away right before COVID. It disappeared. Verizon, let's see, whoever owned it, sold it to Verizon, who said, we don't want it. So Yahoo Groups went away. We had to find something else to replace it to. So 20,000 comadres had to be changed from Yahoo to Groups.io, which is where we went. That was really hard. So it's been very, very challenging to do all of that. But again, back to book club. That we taped all these. We started identifying who are our authors, identifying them, and sharing their book information and interviewing them and learning about their writing. And then the American Association of Publishers, along with Johanna Castillo, who was an editor at Simon & Schuster, said, hey, we'd like to put together a national book club. Borders was a part of this kind of thing because they represented all the publishers in New York City. I got to know all the publishers. I got to know all the agents. There weren't that many Latino agents, still aren't, but that put me in that world. Okay, so all of a sudden I'm big in publishing because everybody got to know me and do all that kind of stuff. So, and it was all because I was at the right place at the right time. Okay, you go back to luck. I'm the luckiest, one of the luckiest human beings in this world. So here we are, and we create this whole book club, starts book club at that time. And with Zoom, it's so much easier and so much better. And it's just, we didn't have that before. So we were working with technology that was just the telephone. But we got it. We did it. We did from 2006, 7 to 2019. Those are interviews.
And so you mentioned that you retired from your position with Las Comadres in 2015. What's your involvement with the organization today?
Oh, very much involved because I took it back over. I was very difficult. I was very difficult during this transition. Mostly, I think, because I didn't understand. I wanted out. But what I wanted out of was the administrative work. I didn't want out of the organization. I'll never be out of the organization. But I didn't want to do any more of that typing. I didn't want to spend 20-hour days. I didn't want to spend my life's blood doing stuff that wasn't fulfilling me. So that was, and I was very difficult. But so eventually I ended up picking it up again and having to reconstruct it because Yahoo it was still there, but some of the board members didn't believe that email was important anymore, so they kind of tore it apart and had to put it back together. So it was the putting back together, then Yahoo goes away, then COVID happens, and we keep going. So we're regrowing, pulling the pieces together. A woman in New York City named Maria Ferrer has graciously, during COVID, agreed to take over for me. And so I've been working with her in that transition. And I will make sure, if I am alive, that she doesn't have to do 20-hour days in the same way that I did. I'm looking for ways to stabilize that. Maggie and I agree about this because Voces was in a similar situation. I mean, I understood how if you're the main person creating something, you gotta transition it to somebody else or it dies. So I won't let that happen.
So this is one of my last questions for you. What do you see in the future for Las Comadres para las Américas? Any new projects, goals?
The world is our stage. That's what, I was telling Maria. We are dealing with some trademark stuff, some issues that came up around trademark. And I said, I want to make sure we get this taken care of because I want to leave an open field for you to do everything you want to do and everything you dream. If they want to do a movie, if they want to have podcasts, if they want, whatever's possible, you dream it. The future is ours to define in so many ways. The technology that's coming up, all these things that are happening, training and providing opportunities for comadres to learn about, cryptocurrency and about investing and about growing your personal wealth, and that plus all these other things you could conceivably learn, it's all in the playfield. You take it and do whatever you want with it. I just want to make sure the trademark's there so you can do all of those things. So what can we do? You name it. We can do it.
And so I have one more clarifying question. So how does one join Las Comadres? What's the process like? Are there any dues that people pay?
No, from the very first, when we created our bylaws, we said there will be no dues. There will be no fees. How are we going to pay for this thing? I don't think anybody ever dreamed that it would get so big that it would take 20 hours in a day to keep it going. So we didn't, but I will always, always, always insist, Las Comadres basic membership has to be free, which means you get all the emails, which we send lots of information, and other social media that they use. I don't use social media except for email. In the what do you call it, the comadrazos, going to attending comadrazos, which is you come with a potluck to somebody's home and you share it and people just talk and there's no agenda. We talk, we just have a good time. And we get to know each other. That's the important thing. You build community. That's a community that's missing in other places. So that's how we create that. No dues, no officers, no commitments. In the beginning, I remember that there were women who were fighting over being the leader. They wanted to be the president, the secretary. I said, there's no such thing. There is no hierarchy here. Decision maker, I'm it. I'm paying for all of this stuff out of my husband's checkbook. Nobody. I get to make the final decision. And it really wasn't true. I mean, I always brought people in. I created a manual that was about this big with all the instructions, and now it's 20 pages. But it used to be because of all these things I learned about how to manage groups, how to manage people, the decisions you make, blah, blah, blah. To put all of that down and have somebody learn it to help you facilitate a network, and each network is separate. It's not one big comadres. There is one big comadres, but each city is individual. It's too hard. So it's down to 20 pages now. But all of this stuff, I learned it. I learned it by doing it. So I can tell you, if you tell me, well, we want to do this, I said, well, you can do that. But here's the challenges you need to think about. Like they said, we want to take our kids to comadrazos and all this other stuff. And I said, that's fine. But here's that decision impacts all of these other things. Make that decision cognizant of what the impact is of that decision. I'm not telling you not to do it, but you might want to say comadrazos with kids are separate from a general comadrazo, because people who don't have kids, many of them don't want to be around kids. They're leaving their kids so that they can go be with you and enjoy you and just, be together, not have to worry about what your kids are doing. And it's too hard to get childcare. I mean, my God, think about it. So, those are the things that I had to think about as we went along the way. And so I would create rules, guidelines to help us manage the complexity of what we were trying to do. But it's free, totally free.
Well, thank you for that. I don't have any more questions on my list, but is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you think is important that we get on recording?
What did I do with my book? Well, we actually published a book called Count on Me, Tales of Sisterhoods and Fierce Friendships. And it was published in 2012. and it's also in a Spanish version, published in 2013, where it's an anthology, and 12, because it was our 12th year, um, 11 women and 1 man. And they wrote something about a comadre, or their comadre experience, or where they learned it, or how they lived it, or whatever it was. And so we published that particular book through Simon & Schuster published it. And I think one of the most important things to understand about that book is it's not individual comadres. They're all comadres. All the authors were comadres. And Luis Urea was a compadre. And it's not individual stories of comadres. It's about an experience or somebody that was a comadre, or how you learned about comadres. It just had different aspects of, and they didn't all have to be Latinas, but it was the experience of comadre. And one of the things, I mean, sometimes people assume you know so much, and you don't. And so assumptions are really scary and dangerous. They assumed we had, at that time, I think we had, I don't know, maybe in 2012, 10,000 comadres, something like that people were going to buy the book. They never won. Big mistake. You have to push books. They don't just get sold by an email, get sent out. The other thing that you assume is that the person who's kind of leading the book thing is going to sell the book. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it because I never put Las Comadres ahead of anybody else. We're equal in this game. I'm equal to you. You and I are comadres. We're equal. I am not going to put my whatever in front of yours. You have a book and I have a book. My book isn't going to be here. We're going to be together. So I couldn't go out and push my book. You call it my book. It wasn't my book. It was our book. I couldn't go sell that book without selling your book. You know how many authors there are? It made it really, really difficult so I was supposed to be selling. I didn't know that. I didn't understand clearly that unless I stood up and said, buy my book, that I wasn't going to sell enough books, okay? We didn't sell enough books because I didn't do that. So today, I know that if I decide and agree that we're going to have something comadres out there, we've got to be willing to stand behind it and tell everybody, you're as important as we are, but in order to be able to support you and the work you're doing, you've got to support this one. Because we are the mother lode to make it possible for you to succeed. I couldn't explain it at the time. I didn't understand the relationship between the gift I was given of publishing that book and talking to other people about it. I think you need to understand all those dynamics and those relationships to, in the end, make things work. And I didn't. So I learned that. But now I tell everybody, you need to know, writing the book is only half of the battle. The other half is selling it.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would just like to add? Not just regarding Las Comadres, but anything we've discussed so far?
I have so many incredible friends all over the country and now all over the world because of Las Comadres. Women I would never have met who have enriched my life beyond words. And it hasn't been just women, it's their families, because their families are also a part of Las Comadres, and their spouses or significant others. I mean, we don't differentiate. It's everybody is welcome, and our lives have been enriched by the women here. And I am just so grateful that this long story you've heard brought me to a place where I could do this.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Comstock, for sharing your story with us today. And that concludes our interview.
Oh my God. It was a long one, wasn't it?